Avowed's first trailer was everything RPG fans wanted it to be. It was immersive, dark, and dripping with atmosphere. It was pitched as Obsidian's answer to Skyrim. For fans of Obsidian's past work, this was a dream come true. Then the launch trailer dropped. Gone was the dark, ominous tone. Instead, it was replaced by bright colours, an almost cartoonish art style, and an entirely different visual identity altogether. What was once a serious immersive RPG concept now looked like a stylized, fast-paced adventure game. But the biggest issue wasn't just the change. It was the players weren't even told it was happening. The reveal had promised one thing, but the game players were getting was something entirely different. It was a bait and switch in real time. People who had been waiting for a grounded Skyrim-style RPG were left wondering, had that ever actually been the plan to begin with? This wasn't just about graphical style or artistic choices. It's about trust. When a studio builds excitement around a specific vision, then changes it entirely when the game's close to release, it erodes confidence in everything you say. If they weren't upfront about the massive tonal shift, what else were they hiding? Was the world as expansive as they claimed? Was the depth of choice still there? Doubt started creeping in before the game was even in players' hands. But the real problem wasn't just the deception. It was why it happened in the first place. Because when you look at the people making the decisions at Obsidian, based off their social media activity and interviews close to release, it became clear that delivering the best possible RPG experience wasn't exactly their top priority. So let's start with Matt Hansen, Avowed's art director. Instead of simply discussing the game's visual design or world building in interviews, Hansen was making headlines for all the wrong reasons. He wasn't talking about creating a unique fantasy aesthetic or crafting an immersive atmosphere. He was proudly exposing on social media how he wanted to make his game woke and make Elon Musk mad. Now, regardless of where you stand on those points, it's hard to argue that those priorities had anything to do with making a great RPG. This wasn't just an offhand remark. It was part of a larger trend within the industry. Developers who spend more time posturing on social media than actually refining the games that they're making. And the worst part? Well, it's that Obsidian simply just let it happen. There was no damage control, no reassurance to fans that the game was still their top priority, just radio silence. If anything, this showed that the studio was perfectly fine with the people in charge treating their project like a soapbox instead of a job. And then there was Avowed's game director, Harry Patel, who took a very different but equally concerning approach. Now, instead of hyping up the game's mechanics or depths, she told players to expect some jank. Now, to be fair, Obsidian has always been a bit rough with their games, so that's nothing new. But when a studio is preemptively lowering expectations before launch, it's usually because they know they have a problem. Instead of reassuring fans that Avowed would be polished and immersive, the message is, yeah, it's going to be rough, deal with it. The reasoning behind this was because they were doing something fun and creative. A very vague explanation for gamers wanting to play Avowed, because what does this actually mean? Since the game's gone live, we've realised that came to mean, well, not much at all. At this point, it was clear that Obsidian had lost control of the narrative. The art director was making headlines for political statements instead of creative direction, and the game director was already managing expectations downward before anyone had even played the game. And the studio itself? Completely silent, as their RPG, a game meant to define the next generation of Obsidian's legacy, slowly became a joke. But this is the thing, a game can still be great even if the people making it have the wrong priorities. Sometimes, despite everything, the final product still shines through. So the real question was, would Avowed actually deliver? Would it defy expectations and win players over? Well, no. At this point, Avowed had already lost. But before we get into that, shameless begging for subs.
Please, sir. I want some more.
Now back to the video. It didn't pull strong sales, its player counts on Steam were incredibly underwhelming, and overall consumer interest had faded. The game had already written its own obituary, but instead of letting Obsidian take responsibility, of course gaming journalists and industry defenders did what they always do, and that's run damage control. The first step in media spin? Well, reframing the conversation. Instead of addressing Avowed's obvious shortcomings, outlets and social media influencers tried shifting expectations. Avowed isn't meant to be like Skyrim, it's more like the Outer Worlds. The Outer Worlds comparison didn't come out of nowhere though. Avowed's game director, Kari Patel, was also in charge of the Outer Worlds and subsequent titles in the series, and instead of admitting that the game failed to deliver on its initial vision, the media pivoted to pretending that comparison was the plan all along in the lead up to the game's release. Then came the player count spin. Some articles and defenders claimed Avowed was a massive success because of its Xbox player numbers, but they conveniently ignored one thing. Its Steam numbers were shockingly low. Avowed never even cracked 20,000 peak concurrent players on Steam, and that numbers kept on dropping post-launch. And what was their excuse? It's because of Game Pass. The argument went that since Avowed was on Game Pass day one, players simply weren't buying it on Steam. But that logic fell apart immediately when compared to other Game Pass releases. Just look at Starfield. It launched day one on Game Pass just like Avowed did. It still hit 330,000 concurrent players on Steam. It even has way worse reviews and skepticism from the gaming community, but it still drew massive attention. Game Pass wasn't the issue. Avowed just didn't attract enough interest. And if you check the reviews on Steam itself, even the positive ones aren't very compelling. It's not offensively bad, just meh. It's fine, if unexceptional, and not bad for killing time. This is not how players talk about great RPGs. A game like Baldur's Gate 3 gets passionate essays in its reviews. Even flawed games like Cyberpunk 2077 have defenders who love them. And Avowed, it was just meh and met with shrugs. So despite all the media spin, despite the Game Pass excuses, despite the comparisons being changed after the fact, none of it changed the simple truth. Players just weren't interested anymore in Avowed. But why? What was it about the game itself that made it so forgettable? The short answer here is that Avowed's world is pretty much lifeless. Even players who wanted to like it found themselves struggling to stay engaged. It's not a completely broken game, and it wasn't unplayable. It just doesn't feel alive. The world feels completely static. Unlike immersive RPGs where NPCs have routines, react to events, and make the world feel dynamic, Avowed's world feels frozen in place. NPCs mostly never move from their spots. They have no day-night cycle changes where they go back to their homes, no schedules, just lifeless statues standing there no matter the time of day or night. Stealing is meaningless. You also can't attack random NPCs like other RPG games. The world has no sense of danger, no unpredictability, just invisible walls everywhere. For a game that was supposed to be a deep, immersive RPG, Avowed has completely failed to make its world feel real. The best RPGs make you feel like you're stepping into a living, breathing world. Avowed feels simply like a theme park ride with no moving parts. Even many of those who have finished the game walked away feeling not much. A great RPG stays with you. Players debate its moral choices, discuss its characters, and they return to it years later. And Avowed, it's barely left an impression. And then ultimately, there's the exorbitant price of the game just by itself. I live in Australia and the game is $120. That's $75 USD for the standard edition. Avowed is charging AAA prices for what feels like a mid-budget RPG. Players might have excused its issues at a lower price, say $30 USD, $60 Australian. Seems fair. But at full cost, when you can play it for free on Game Pass, even if you want to, this simply just doesn't justify the purchase, and probably also goes away to explaining the piss poor Steam player counts. But even with all the jankiness around it, Avowed's biggest problem isn't being broken. It's just about being a lifeless game. It's not memorable, it's not particularly immersive, and it absolutely is not worth the price. And that's why players have moved on pretty damn quickly to other games. So how do you take what should have been an easy win and turn it into a sheer disappointment like Avowed? Market a dark immersive RPG that looks like Skyrim, then bait and switch to something else without telling your audience? It's a good start. How about have your art director care more about social media posturing than the actual game that they're working on? Then have your studio do nothing when he trashes your brand on social media for his personal ego? It's another good one. Have your game designer tell your players to expect jank and an unpolished, unfinished game instead of, trying to avoid it by making a feature complete game upon release would be a good start. And of course, letting gaming journalists run PR for you, gaslighting your players into thinking they're the problem as usual. And lastly, launch a game that's aggressively mid at best, ensuring it will be forgotten within just a few short months. Avowed was supposed to be Obsidian's magnum opus. Instead, it's simply a textbook example of how to kill your game before it even launches. And it's not even that this game is particularly bad. It simply suffered from creating unrealistic expectations for itself, changing its game aesthetics from the original trailer and becoming a victim of the culture war that has doomed so many other titles in recent years, and doing nothing to disassociate themselves from the senior staff who indulge themselves in it. So, will Obsidian learn from this? Or will this just be another decline in the long line of Western RPGs? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, please make sure you leave a like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye for now.